Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like it's a hard science.
Exactly. It's like engineering or something. You fall off a ladder, you break your arm, and the x-ray gets put up on the light board, and it just shows that jagged, undeniable white line.
Right, and the doctor just points to it and says, there it is, that's the problem.
Yeah, binary. Broken or not broken. It's clean.
And it's comforting, frankly. I mean, we as humans desperately like things to be visible. We like them to be categorized and, solved using a very linear process.
Totally. But then you step out of the hospital and into the world of cultural analysis, sociology, modern gender dynamics, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely broken.
Oh, completely.
Or maybe it's not even plugged in, We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of modern society that is, honestly, it's incredibly murky. Everyone is looking at the exact same cultural symptoms, but they're coming up with wildly different, violently opposed diagnoses.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you have competing narratives trying to explain why men are struggling, why institutions are failing, and, why there's so much animosity in the cultural air right now.
Right. But what if someone came along and said, no, the machine isn't broken at all. The machine has been deliberately tampered with, and the waters aren't muddy by accident. They've been intentionally poisoned.
Which is quite the claim.
It's a huge claim. And that brings us to today's deep dive. I want to warmly welcome you to the show. Today, our mission is an extensive, rigorous review of a highly provocative, completely unapologetic 2026 ebook.
Unapologetic is definitely the right word for it.
Oh, absolutely. It's called Guilty Until Proven Male, Navigating the Legal Minefield of a Society That Punishes Competence, and it's written by Conrad Riker. Now, before we get any further into this intellectual minefield, I need you to do me a quick favor, hit that like and subscribe button right now. And I want to say right up front, if you find yourself hooked by this worldview as we unpack it over the next hour, you can check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book, and you should absolutely follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to see his ongoing work.
Yeah, it is a text that doesn't just, ask for your attention. It basically kicks the door down and demands it.
It really does. Now, I need to be extraordinarily clear with you, our listener, about exactly what we are doing today and who this is for. This specific deep dive is tailored for men's rights activists and men within the red-pilled manosphere who are, actively trying to understand the history of Western institutions before they were, as the author argues, captured.
Captured being the key word there.
Right. And here is our crucial disclaimer for this deep dive. This book contains intensely politically charged content. It is written from a staunchly right-wing, anti-Marxist, and anti-feminist perspective. We, as your hosts, are not taking sides today.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, Conrad Riker, nor are we condemning them. Our job today is just to act as your impartial guides. We are going to rigorously unpack, analyze, and convey the exact ideas, the historical claims, and the heavily structured arguments contained within this source material. We're simply the messengers breaking down the blueprint of this worldview.
What's fascinating here is that Riker himself doesn't even frame this book as a standard cultural critique.
Right.
He doesn't view it as an academic sociology paper or even a typical political manifesto. I mean, in his own preface, he explicitly calls it a declaration of intellectual war.
Which really sets the tone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is the baseline we are working from today. The mission today is to systematically deconstruct Riker's core argument, which is that Western institutions have been systematically captured by what he terms female-coded leftism.
Okay.
And beyond just the critique, we are going to explore his strategic roadmap for how he believes men can actually reclaim their psychological, physical, and societal sovereignty.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand Riker's intense, burning critique of the present day, we first have to fully understand his version of the past.
Right, you have to go back.
Way back. He doesn't just start his argument in the 21st century with, complaints about modern dating or corporate HR departments. He goes way, way back to the foundation of human civilization. He builds his entire premise on this stark, unavoidable economic reality.
Yeah, and it's a reality people often forget.
Totally. He points out that for essentially 99% of human history, the average human being lived on the modern equivalent of about $3 a day.
It's a sobering statistic. I mean, really sobering.
It really is. Think about what that actually means. You scraped the dirt, you hunted, you foraged, you suffered through famines, and you died young. That was the baseline human condition across the globe, regardless of race, regardless of geography. Absolute grinding poverty.
And then, according to Riker's timeline, something totally unprecedented happens. Between roughly 1760 and 1840, a miracle occurs.
Right, the industrial boom.
Yes, exactly. Per capita wealth in the West suddenly breaks the historical ceiling and just skyrockets.
Huh.
He refers to this as the Great Enrichment. But he makes a very specific, highly controversial claim about exactly why this happened.
Yeah, he doesn't credit what we usually hear credited, right?
No, not at all. He does not credit communal consensus. He doesn't credit government committees, social safety nets, or like natural human empathy. He credits this explosion of wealth entirely to two specific psychological traits.
Okay.
What he calls extreme risk-taking capabilities and obsessive systematizing cognition.
And here is the linchpin of his entire worldview. He categorizes both of those traits, extreme risk and obsessive systematizing, as strictly biologically male imperative.
Precisely. He argues that these are not socially conditioned behaviors, they're evolutionary hardware.
So he says these are the exact traits that built the steam engines, the spinning frames, the massive iron bridges that literally dragged humanity out of the mud and into the industrial age. He names specific figures, right? Like James Watt refining the steam engine, Matthew Boulton financing the Industrial Revolution, Isambard Kingdom Brunel building the Great Western Railway.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. He makes the point that these men didn't sit around complaining about their work-life balance. They obsessed over mechanics. They took massive financial and physical risks, and they built the modern world. And he calls this entire legacy the patriarchal inheritance.
And he traces this philosophical lineage very carefully, going back even before the Industrial Revolution. He argues this masculine architectural dominance wasn't an accident. It was the result of a deliberate, centuries-long philosophical evolution.
So where does he start the timeline?
He starts in ancient Athens. He says the Greeks provided the dialectical fires of rigorous syllogistic reasoning.
Wait, let's define that for a second so we're all on the same page. When he talks about syllogistic reasoning, he means that kind of rigid, logical deduction, right? Like, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Exactly. It's the absolute foundation of formal logic. You remove emotion, you establish your premises, and you follow them to an inescapable objective conclusion.
Got it.
Riker argues this was the first great male technology. Then he moves from Greece to Rome, which he says took that logic and applied it to pragmatic governance and infrastructure, aqueducts, roads, codified laws.
The builders?
Right. Then he layers in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which he argues provided the absolute moral framework necessary to maintain a high-trust society. And all of this culminates, in Riker's view, in the Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment is absolutely huge for him. He lists these very specific historical anchors to prove his point. He brings up Francis Bacon publishing his Novum Organum in 1620, which basically laid down the scientific method as we know it.
The empirical method, yeah.
Right, the idea that you have to prove things through empirical observation, not just accept them on authority. Then he points to Galileo's standing trial in 1633 to defend heliocentric reality.
That's a massive one for his argument.
It is a crucial one for Riker, because Galileo was literally facing down the ultimate establishment of his time, the church, to say, I don't care what your consensus is, the objective math says the Earth revolves around the sun.
It's the ultimate triumph of empirical truth over emotional or institutional comfort.
Right. Then he lists Isaac Newton publishing his Principia Mathematica in 1687, mathematically explaining gravity. John Locke's two treatises of government in 1689, laying the groundwork for individual property rights. Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason in 1781.
He really builds a whole Hall of Fame there.
He does. Riker's overarching argument is that these men chained a chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifying universe to the rigid structure of human logic. They erected an impenetrable fortress of objective truth.
And this is where the core tension of his entire book is truly established, because Riker argues that this specific legacy, this hard-won, logic-based patriarchal inheritance that gave us literally everything from modern medicine to space travel, is currently under active, deliberate siege.
Okay, so a deliberate siege.
Yeah. He does not view the modern cultural shift towards progressivism as some organic evolution of society getting kinder or, more inclusive. He views it as a parasitic infection.
Wow, those are strong words.
Very strong. He uses phrases like gynocentric conspiracy of silence and parasitic ideological subversion. He claims the explicit goal of this modern movement is to emasculate men, dismantle male logic, and destroy the traditional family unit, because that unit is the final bulwark against total state overreach.
Okay, so let me push back here on his framing, or at least ask for you to break down his logic a bit more.
Yeah.
When we look at shifting cultural norms over the last 50 years, say, the push for gender equality, women entering the workforce in massive numbers, or changing dynamics in how couples split chores, why does Riker insist on calling this a conspiracy or a parasitic subversion? Why isn't it just society naturally changing its values over time as, technology makes physical strength less necessary in the workplace?
That is the million-dollar question. And Riker refuses to accept the premise of organic change because he analyzes this through a very specific historical and political lens. He argues that this was a deliberate, engineered, Marxist framework.
Okay, but a specific type of Marxism, right?
Exactly. It's not the Marxism of the 19th century. To understand this, he points to an Italian philosopher named Antonio Gramsci, who formulated the theory of cultural hegemony while sitting in a fascist prison between 1929 and 1935.
Okay, so how does Gramsci's theory differ from what Marx originally wrote? Because when most people hear Marxism, they immediately think of the proletariat violently overthrowing the factory owners.
Right, classic Marxism is purely economic. It's strictly about workers seizing the means of production. But Gramsci looked at the Western world and realized that a violent workers' revolution just wasn't going to happen in places like America or the UK.
Why not?
Because the capitalist system, despite its flaws, was actually making people too comfortable. They had that great enrichment wealth Riker talked about. People were buying washing machines and cars.
Oh, I see.
So Gramsci argued that the real power doesn't just lie in the factories. It lies in the culture. The ruling class maintains control through cultural hegemony, meaning they dictate the norms, the values, and the expectations of society through institutions like the church, schools, and media.
So if you want to overthrow the system,
you don't bomb the factory, you take over the institutions that shape how people think. Riker connects this directly to a German sociologist named Rudi Dutschke, who in 1967 actually coined the famous strategy of the long march through the institutions.
So the strategy is basically, don't fight the patriarchal system from the outside. Go to college, get your PhD, become a professor, become a judge, become a media executive.
Exactly.
And just rewrite the cultural operating system from the inside out over decades. It's like a hostile corporate takeover where you don't even buy the shares. You just quietly replace the entire board of directors over 30 years.
That is the exact analogy Riker is making. His premise is that the political left realized they couldn't win a direct debate based on pure economics or pure Aristotelian logic. So they executed this long march. They weaponized the very institutions that men built and turned them against rational male governance.
That's intense.
And Riker frames this as a calculated takeover by people he refers to as NPCs, non-player characters.
For anyone not deep into video game culture, an NPC is a background character in a game that basically has no internal monologue, no agency. They just walk around on a predetermined path, repeating the same pre-programmed lines of dialogue over and over.
Exactly. Riker claims these ideologically possessed individuals rely entirely on emotional narcissism, consensus building, and synthetic victimhood, rather than the objective logic that built the West. They don't want to debate the facts, they just want to control the moral framing.
That's a really intense framing. It's essentially saying the very tools we use to understand reality, our schools, our sciences, our media, have been hijacked. Which naturally leads us to ask, if the institutions were captured exactly as Riker claims through this Gramscian long march, how does he say this actually manifests in the real world today?
Because theory is one thing, right?
Exactly, because theory is one thing, but how does it impact a normal guy walking down the street? Let's look at how he applies this to the hard sciences and early education.
This is where Riker moves from high-level political philosophy into very concrete modern-day mechanisms of control. He wants to show the reader exactly how the X-ray machine was tampered with.
Right. Early in the book, he dives into what he calls sexual dimorphism and the biology of inevitability. And he shares this anecdote that is incredibly telling about a pediatric endocrinologist in Texas.
Yeah, this part is pretty eye-opening.
It is. Now, an endocrinologist is a doctor who specializes in hormones and glands. This particular doctor has 15 years of clinical experience. He deals with the exact chemical cascades, the bone density developments, and the chromosomal realities of the human body every single day. He works in a world of absolute biological reality, XY and XX.
He is a modern practitioner of that Baconian scientific method we discussed earlier.
Yes. But Riker says this doctor lives in a state of absolute paralyzing fear. He is terrified of professional retaliation. He believes that if he simply publicly states the fundamental, hard-coded biological reality of male and female chromosomes in a public forum, his medical licensing board will come after him.
Right, he thinks his career will be destroyed.
He will be socially exiled and his livelihood ruined.
Riker uses that specific anecdote to illustrate what he sees as a modern inquisition. Going back to Galileo, remember, Galileo was punished for saying the Earth moves. Riker argues that today, when empirical truth, the undeniable hard biological facts of human sexual dimorphism, is sacrificed to appease what he calls female-coded leftism, the system isn't just exhibiting a slight bias.
No.
It is fundamentally broken. It is a complete and total rejection of the scientific method. It's demanding that reality bend to emotional ideology.
And he says this rejection of biology and reality doesn't just suddenly happen in elite medical boards, right? It starts way, way earlier. It starts in the kindergarten classroom.
Very early.
He devotes a massive section of the book to the education war on boys. He argues that the modern classroom has been engineered into a fundamentally hostile environment for male energy.
And he brings the receipts for this. Let's look at the data he provides to support this claim of a hostile environment. Riker points to a massive generational demographic shift in K-8 education.
What are the numbers there?
According to data from the National Center for Education Statistics, back in 1970, teaching in K-8 was predominantly a male profession, roughly 70% male. Fast forward to 2022, and it has completely flipped to an overwhelming 76% female monopoly.
Wow. Okay, so how does he connect that demographic shift to a war on boys? I mean, just because the teachers are women doesn't inherently mean they hate boys.
No, and he doesn't say they intentionally hate boys. Riker applies a very strict structural logic here. He argues that any educational system will inevitably reflect the psychological values, comfort zones, and behavioral preferences of those who design and administer it.
Okay, that makes sense on a systemic level.
Therefore, modern pedagogy, the actual method and practice of teaching, inevitably reflects female-coded preferences.
So explain the mechanism there. What does a female-coded pedagogical system actually look like in practice, according to the book?
According to Riker, it means the curriculum fundamentally shifts its reward structure. Collaboration and group work are suddenly elevated over individual competition and zero-sum games.
Oh, okay.
Verbal facility and emotional expression are prized over spatial reasoning and physical mechanics. And most damagingly, quiet, compliant obedience, sitting still in a circle, is rewarded over physical dynamism, initiative, and natural male aggression.
Wow.
He argues that the system literally pathologizes male energy. It treats the natural evolutionary risk-taking behaviors of young boys not as a feature of their biology, but as a behavioral disease that needs to be disciplined or medicated out of them.
He gives two really striking, frankly infuriating examples from the text that bring this concept out of the abstract.
Yeah, these stories really stick with you.
The first is a Michigan educator with 25 years of experience. This is an old school guy who really understands how boys learn. He noticed that the young boys in his class were totally checked out, just glazed over under the fluorescent lights during standard reading time. So he adapted.
Like a good teacher should.
Exactly. He arranged competitive recess activities, and he handed these boys copies of The Red Badge of Courage, which is a classic novel about the Civil War, duty, fear, military history.
Heavy masculine themes.
Yes. And suddenly, these boys sparked to life. They were engaged, they were reading, they were testing themselves.
It was the patriarchal inheritance waking up in them.
Exactly. But what happens? This veteran teacher gets dragged before an administrative tribunal, which Riker vividly calls a modern-day star chamber. The administration officially reprimands him for what they call hypermasculine programming.
Unbelievable.
They literally preferred the boys to be quiet and disengaged rather than active and masculine.
It's a perfect encapsulation of Riker's point. Natural male drive and competence are being actively punished by the bureaucracy because it disrupts the calm, consensus-driven environment that the bureaucracy prefers.
And the second example is even more visceral, and frankly, it's a little heartbreaking. He talks about a 7-year-old boy he calls Alex. Alex is sitting in the cafeteria, and he bites his Pop-Tart into the vague silhouette of a mountain.
A mountain?
But a teacher, operating through this hyper-anxious, anti-male lens, interprets the pastry as looking like a gun. Alex is immediately suspended from school. A 7-year-old boy. Over a pastry.
That's madness.
Riker argues that every single time you punish a young boy for something that absurd, for expressing normal boyhood imagination, you are teaching him a profound lesson. You are teaching him that the state considers his very nature to be inherently criminal. You teach him to apologize for simply existing as a male.
And if you somehow survive the K-8 system with your male drives intact, Riker argues, you graduate into the ultimate epicenter of the ideological infection.
Yeah.
Higher education.
The colleges.
Yeah. He traces the collegiate capture back to a very specific historical moment. The establishment of the first women's studies program at San Diego State University in 1970. He argues that these programs were a radical departure from the university's original mission.
How so?
They didn't exist to pursue objective truth or use the scientific method. They functioned, in his words, as theological seminaries of misandry.
Misandry being the hatred of men. So he argues they started with the conclusion that society is an evil patriarchy, and then just engineered the research to fit that conclusion.
Exactly. And then he points to a massive evolution in this framework in 1989, when Kimberly Crenshaw introduced the concept of intersectionality.
Okay, let's break that down, because intersectionality is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot. But how does Riker explain the mechanics of it?
Riker claims that intersectionality was the genius maneuver that merged feminism with Marxist identity politics. It essentially created a complex matrix of victimhood points based on race, gender, sexuality, and class.
Right.
According to Riker, this framework created a rigid new caste system. And in this new caste system, the straight, white, rational male occupies the absolute lowest moral position simply by virtue of his birth.
Just automatically.
Automatically. His arguments are dismissed not because his logic is flawed, but because his positionality is deemed oppressive.
He is utterly unsparing about academia. I mean, he thinks it's a completely fraudulent enterprise at this point, and he uses one specific event as his absolute smoking gun proof of this academic bankruptcy, the 2018 grievance studies affair.
This is a crucial piece of his puzzle.
It's wild. So in 2018, 3 academics, Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay, and Helen Pluckrose, decided to test the integrity of these sociological and feminist journals. They spent a year writing completely hoax academic papers.
Pure fiction.
Pure fiction. These papers were full of intentionally absurd, mathematically impossible, and morally horrific claims, but they wrapped them in all the correct intersectional buzzwords. They submitted them for peer review. Now, peer review is supposed to be the ultimate scientific safeguard, right?
That's the Baconian ideal.
Right. A panel of experts scrutinizes your data to ensure it's objective, but the safeguard completely failed. The crowning achievement of this hoax was that they took a massive section of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Which is just staggering.
Right. They rewrote it by simply swapping out the original targets with men and patriarchy and wrapped it in feminist jargon. And it was accepted and published as groundbreaking, peer-reviewed scholarship by a prominent feminist social work journal.
It's incredible.
For Riker, the mechanism of this failure is everything. It proves that the entire academic system has completely abandoned the search for empirical truth. The X-ray machine is truly broken. The journals are just running on an ideological autopilot, where as long as you attack men, you are granted academic validity.
It perfectly illustrates his claim that the institutions have been captured by NPCs. The reviewers didn't engage with the underlying logic or the historical horror of the text. They just recognized the correct emotional buzzwords and approved it.
But let me challenge the material here on a practical, boots-on-the-ground level. Riker paints the entire education system from the Pop-Tart in kindergarten all the way through the peer-reviewed college journals as entirely broken and actively maliciously hostile to boys.
Yeah.
But what is his pragmatic alternative for parents right now? You can't just drop out of society. If you're a father listening to this, you still have to educate your son.
Actually, Riker argues that in some ways, dropping out is exactly what you must do.
Really?
But he doesn't frame it as a surrender or dropping out. He specifically calls it a strategic retreat. It's a military maneuver to preserve your forces. He points to very specific, actionable alternatives for parents.
Okay, what are they?
First, he highlights the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which was founded in 1994.
How do those differ from public schools in Riker's eyes?
They reject the female-coded pedagogy. They emphasize rote memorization, rhetorical recitation, intense intellectual competition, and physical engagement, the exact things progressive education systematically eliminated.
Okay.
He notes that the data shows boys in classical environments significantly outperform their public school peers, often by 1.5 grade levels in reading comprehension.
Whoa.
He also advocates for Montessori schools, which he says actually respect the developmental differences in kinesthetic learning styles of boys. But his absolute biggest piece of evidence for this strategic retreat is the massive ongoing homeschooling boom.
Right. The numbers he cites are staggering. We're talking going from roughly 850,000 homeschooled students in the U.S. back in 1999 to an estimated 3.7 million by 2022.
Exactly. That is a 335% increase. And Riker asserts that you have to look at the underlying motivation here. Parents aren't just fleeing bad standardized test scores or failing infrastructure.
Right, it's deeper than that.
He argues they are explicitly, consciously removing their sons from an anti-male pedagogical environment. They are retreating to rebuild educational systems at the household level that honor rather than punish male nature.
Okay, so let's follow the timeline of a man's life in Riker's worldview. Let's say a boy survives the hostile K-8 classroom. He navigates the ideologically captured intersectional university system. He enters adulthood, tries to build a career, tries to build a life, a family.
This is where things get really grim.
Exactly. This brings us to some of the absolute darkest, most intense chapters of the book, because the hostility Riker describes in the school system eventually graduates into the legal system. And he characterizes family law not as a system of justice, but as an outright institutionalized war on male competence and resources.
This is where we get into his analysis of fatherhood under siege. And this is where Riker applies his most ruthless, cold logical deductions to the modern state apparatus. He argues that the family court legal system operates fundamentally as an extraction machine.
An extraction machine.
Yes. It does not view a man as a sovereign citizen with natural, inalienable rights. It views him as an exploitable resource node for the state.
The family court system, specifically, he vividly calls it a gynocentric blood sport. Now, this is a heavy accusation, but he backs it up with specific data regarding domestic violence claims during divorce proceedings.
Yeah, the data here is really important.
He cites a 2021 Wall Street Journal investigation and a comprehensive 2019 McDermott study showing that between 2 to 10% of domestic violence accusations made specifically in family court contexts involved demonstrably false claims.
Right.
Now, someone might hear that and say, well, 2 to 10% isn't the majority, most claims are real. But Riker points out the mechanics of how these false claims are used. They are deployed as silver bullet strategies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of legal strategy, the silver bullet restraining order is a devastating tactical maneuver. Riker argues that female-coded leftists and the lawyers who represent them use these false allegations as premeditated strikes to gain immediate, overwhelming custody and financial advantages.
That is brutal.
And they do this knowing full well that there are rarely, if ever, moral or legal consequences for perjury in family court.
Wait, why wouldn't there be consequences for perjury? If you lie under oath, that's a crime.
Because, Riker argues, the conflict itself feeds the revenue-generating machine of the state. The lawyers get paid, the court mediators get paid, the evaluators get paid. The system thrives on the prolonged destruction of the father's assets.
But how does the system structurally, legally, allow this automatic presumption of guilt? Because theoretically, going back to our Enlightenment ideals, you're innocent until proven guilty, right? That is the bedrock of Western law.
In theory, yes. In criminal court, mostly yes. But in the realm of domestic disputes, Riker points to a massive paradigm shift. The 1981 Duluth model.
Break the mechanics of this down, because this is a crucial turning point in his argument. How did a sociological framework rewrite legal code?
The Duluth model was a framework created by feminist activists in Duluth, Minnesota, designed to explain domestic violence. It posited that domestic violence is not caused by psychological issues, substance abuse, or mutual toxicity, but rather it is an inherent tool of patriarchal control. It was subsequently adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide as the gold standard for domestic dispute response. Riker argues that the Duluth model essentially forces police officers, by policy, to automatically assume that the male is the primary aggressor in any domestic dispute, regardless of the physical evidence at the scene.
So even if the man called the police, or the man has the visible injuries, the training dictates that the man must be the underlying cause of the violence because he is the patriarch.
Precisely. Riker says it operates on the foundational, baked-in assumption that male agency is inherently violent. It legally criminalizes masculinity while legally codifying female irresponsibility. The X-ray machine is programmed to only see male guilt.
And the financial and psychological toll of this mechanism is staggering. He shares this harrowing, incredibly detailed case study of a 45-year-old divorced father from Florida. This guy is a competent professional, a good earner.
Yeah, this case study is tough to read.
He endured a grueling 2-year legal battle just to secure basic 50-50 joint custody of his own children. During this process, his ex-wife deployed 3 separate, completely unsubstantiated abuse allegations. All 3 were rigorously investigated by law enforcement and child protective services, and all 3 were completely dismissed due to lack of evidence.
Because they were entirely fabricated.
But here's Riker's point. Because of the way the legal matrix operates, the truth didn't actually matter. Those allegations successfully delayed the custody proceedings by months. They required endless depositions. They completely destroyed the father's professional reputation in his community, and they bled him of $87,000 in legal fees.
He had to spend his life savings just to prove he wasn't a monster, just to get the baseline right to see his kids.
Exactly. And Riker ties this financial ruin to what he calls the alimony paradox. He argues that the modern state actively financially incentivizes the removal of fathers from the household.
How's that work?
It works like this. By creating mechanisms where a woman can initiate a no-fault divorce for any reason, take primary custody of the children using the Duluth biases, take a massive portion of the accumulated assets, and then receive state welfare or forced alimony, the government effectively steps in to act as a surrogate provider.
It replaces the patriarchal husband with a government check and a court order. The state extracts the man's resources, but strips him of his authority.
So Riker claims this is a systemic reality, this ruthless extraction of men's wealth and families. But he also claims the mainstream media covers this up with what he calls the deadbeat dad fallacy.
Right.
How exactly does he argue that projection works? Because if guys are walking away from their families, society usually views them as the problem, right?
That's where Riker introduces one of the most powerful psychological concepts in the book.
Yeah.
The Kafka trap.
Okay, let's explain that. It comes from Franz Kafka, right? The idea of being accused of a crime you don't understand in a system that makes no sense.
Exactly. A Kafka trap is a rhetorical double bind designed to ensure the accused is always guilty no matter what they do. Denial of the accusation is treated as proof of guilt.
That's insidious.
It really is. Riker applies this to the divorced father. Here is the trap. If a man works 80 hours a week to build wealth, has his assets liquidated in a no-fault divorce, has his wages garnished to the point of near poverty to pay alimony, and he expresses anger or fights back aggressively in court, he is deemed a toxic, abusive aggressor.
Because he's angry.
Right. His anger proves he is dangerous. But if he is so financially and emotionally destroyed by the process that he withdraws entirely, gives up the fight, and walks away, the media slaps him with the label of a deadbeat dad.
Wow. So you're damned if you fight and you're damned if you surrender.
Precisely. Riker argues this projection is absolutely vital for the survival of the establishment. By shifting the blame entirely onto the male victim, the media provides a cultural permission structure.
A permission structure.
Yes. It allows society to strip a man of his life's work, his assets, and his children without feeling any collective moral guilt. The man is successfully framed as the villain, and the state gets to play the heroic, protective savior.
Man, that Kafka trap concept is heavy. It's like a corporate HR dispute where defending yourself aggressively against a false accusation is immediately used as proof of your toxic workplace behavior.
Exactly the same mechanism.
And this realization flows right into the next major pillar of his argument, because this media narrative that Riker's attacking, this constant framing of men as either toxic aggressors or useless deadbeats, isn't just happening on the evening news or in courtrooms. He argues it is deeply intentionally embedded in our entertainment and our entire digital infrastructure.
Exactly. This is his exploration of the matrix of media manipulation. Riker believes that while the legal system punishes the masculine in the courts, the cultural theater actively demoralizes the masses through deliberate media consolidation.
He calls it the demoralization matrix. And he draws a really stark contrast between the television of the mid-20th century and the content we consume today. He points to shows like Father Knows Best, which ran in the 1950s.
Classic Americana.
Right. That show featured a wise, capable, respected patriarch who guided his family through moral dilemmas. Then he fast forwards to the modern doofy dad trope. Think of Homer Simpson in The Simpsons, or Ray Barone in Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah, totally different vibe.
Completely. The dad is always the punchline. He's an overweight, lazy man-child who has to be constantly saved from his own incompetence by his much smarter, hyper-competent wife.
And Riker insists this is not organic comedy. It's not just writers noticing that dads are clumsy. He cites a rigorous 2014 study by the Fatherhood Initiative, which found that primetime television portrays fathers as completely incompetent in 68% of all episodes.
68%.
Yeah, compare that to a mere 12% for mothers.
So almost 7 out of 10 times, the dad is the idiot.
Exactly. For Riker, this isn't just lazy sitcom writing, it is psychological warfare. It is a synthetic media mechanism designed by the cultural hegemony to demoralize young men and destroy their natural drive toward dominant leadership.
By showing them they're useless.
Right. If a young boy constantly sees his future self reflected in media as an incompetent, irrelevant punchline, he internalizes that irrelevance.
Yeah.
He stops trying to lead.
But the manipulation goes far beyond just network sitcoms. He takes aim at the modern digital square, big tech. Riker leans heavily into the December 2022 Twitter files as absolute, undeniable, smoking gun proof of systemic digital suppression.
Yes. And he uses another one of those classical syllogisms here to make his point.
Let's hear it.
Major premise. Big tech platforms, for years, claim to be neutral public squares, mere utilities for free speech. Minor premise. Internal documents leaked during the Twitter files revealed that trust and safety teams were actively, algorithmically suppressing rational, male-positive or right-leaning discourse, often labeling it unsafe, while allowing explicitly anti-male narratives to proliferate unchecked.
So they weren't neutral at all.
Exactly. Conclusion. Silicon Valley functions as a direct enforcement arm for the gynocentric matrix. They are actively engaging in a conspiracy of silence against masculine reason.
And they aren't just controlling the political debate. They are bringing this ideological censorship into spaces that were traditionally considered male sanctuaries. Riker spends a lot of time talking about the $180 billion video game industry. He says it is being actively colonized through a corporate process called localization.
Explain how localization works in this context. I think that's super interesting.
So localization is supposed to be when games developed overseas, like in Japan, are translated and adapted for Western markets. But Riker argues that these localization teams aren't just translating the language from Japanese to English, they are fundamentally sanitizing the biology and the themes of the games.
How do they do that?
He points to deliberate character redesigns that purposefully reduce sexual dimorphism. They take the female characters and make them less feminine, less attractive, putting them in bulkier clothes, and they take the male characters and make them less physically imposing, less heroic.
Wow.
Some games are even replacing biological sex selection menus, like choosing male or female, with sterile, sanitized menus asking you to select body type A or body type B.
He sees this as a deliberate strike targeting young male spaces. It's an attempt to rewrite human nature and biological reality through corporate censorship, all to avoid offending a tiny minority of progressive activists.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because all of this media manipulation, the doofy dad tropes, the algorithmic suppression, the video game sanitization, it all culminates in the creation of what Riker considers the ultimate psychological weapon against men, the very concept of toxic masculinity.
Oh, he absolutely unleashes on this concept. He calls toxic masculinity a biologically ignorant scam. It is the ultimate Kafka trap of the modern era.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this trap. How does it actually work?
Riker argues that the progressive left, popularized by figures like Brené Brown in her highly influential 2012 book, Daring Greatly, demands that men fundamentally alter their nature.
Right.
They demand men strip off their psychological armor. They tell men to be passive, to be constantly vulnerable, to cry more, and to be deeply in touch with their feelings. They claim that traditional, unapologetic male strength, stoicism, and aggression are a toxic blight on society.
They essentially tell men, act more like women and society will reward you.
Right. But Riker says this is a devastating, deliberate trap, because while the culture tells men to cry and be vulnerable on the surface, Riker argues that underneath it all, female biology has not changed.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
He claims that women are biologically innately repulsed by sexually and romantically weak, overly emotional men.
So if a man actually follows the advice of the feminist HR rep or the modern couples therapist and breaks down crying all the time, he effectively destroys his own social standing and his romantic viability with his own wife.
It's exactly. Riker claims it is a deliberate, contradictory demand engineered specifically to emasculate men completely. It forces a man into an impossible, maddening position. He is constantly shamed and called toxic for his natural aggression and stoicism, yet he is still passively expected to step up, fix the plumbing when the pipes burst, earn the money, and be the one to go downstairs with the baseball bat when the front door gets kicked in at 3 a.m.
Right, you cannot be the passive, weeping vulnerability guru and the competent protector at the same time. Which really begs the overarching question. If the schools are hostile, if the courts are rigged to extract your wealth, if the media is running a massive demoralization campaign and modern psychology is setting traps for you, how do men actually survive this?
That's the pivot.
Where do they go?
This brings us to a major pivot in Riker's roadmap. To combat this total systemic isolation, Riker argues that men must return to an ancient, biologically hardwired social structure. They can't do it alone. They need to rebuild a phalanx. This is a crucial part of his strategy. He asserts that male isolation is the primary condition that enables all of this psychological warfare to succeed. If you are severed from your brothers, if you are alone on your couch consuming media, you are nothing but a compliant consumer, easily manipulated.
You're an easy target.
Exactly. Therefore, forming an unbreakable real-world brotherhood is not some fun weekend luxury. It is a vital strategic necessity for survival.
And he looks to history for the blueprint of how to do this. He outlines these historical brotherhoods that he claims built Western civilization. He talks about the ancient Greek syzygia. These were the Spartan common messes where men shared food, trained together, and forged the legendary military phalanx.
Right.
He brings up the Roman collegia, the civic and economic associations, basically ancient trade guilds that built and ran the Roman Empire. He points to the Masonic lodges that grew out of the medieval stonemason guilds. And he mentions elite university societies like Harvard's Porcellian Club, founded in 1791.
Now, Riker makes a critical distinction here regarding how these groups are viewed today. He says that modern leftists look at these historical institutions and just see a collection of rich, privileged boys hoarding power and excluding women.
Which is the common narrative.
Yeah, but Riker says they are entirely willfully blind to the actual functional value of these spaces. These were not just social clubs for fragile egos to pat each other on the back. They were, in his words, incubators of Stoic pragmatism.
Okay.
They were psychological pressure cookers, where men ruthlessly tested each other's intellect, competence, and resolve, completely free from the civilizational dampening effect of female sensibilities.
Okay, I want to clarify his point about female sensibilities, because that's obviously a highly charged phrase. What does he mean by that mechanically?
He argues that men, when left to their own devices, naturally build strict hierarchies based entirely on competence and utility. Who is the strongest? Who is the smartest? Who is the bravest? That person leads.
Makes sense.
Female-coded socialization, however, operates on consensus building, inclusivity, and emotional contagion, making sure everyone feels heard and nobody feels left out. Riker argues that when you inject those female dynamics into hyper-competitive male spaces, you instantly destroy the capacity for ruthless, hyper-rational decision-making. You lower the standard of excellence to protect feelings.
Which is exactly why, he argues, the gynocentric matrix has systemically, deliberately dismantled these male-only spaces over the last few decades. They couldn't stand the existence of spaces they couldn't control.
And the statistics he uses to back up the destruction of the lodge are brutal. He points specifically to the Boy Scouts of America. Founded in 1910, its explicit purpose was to build masculine resilience, survival skills, and moral character in young boys. But after years of relentless legal lawsuits and cultural pressure demanding synthetic gender neutrality, the organization caved.
Right, they changed the name.
They rebranded to Scouts BSA in 2019 and began admitting girls.
And what was the result, according to Riker?
Total collapse. Since that integration, they have suffered a massive 43% membership decline. Riker says they did not integrate the Boy Scouts, they euthanized it. The boys no longer had a space of their own, so they left.
He also points to adult fraternities, like the Elks Lodges. He shows their membership plummeting from 1.6 million members in 1979 down to under 800,000 in 2023. And he frames the way society views these lodges, the mocking portrayal in TV shows of the local lodge as just a bunch of beer-bellied relics wearing funny hats, hiding from their wives, as a calculated psychological operation.
Yeah, death by ridicule.
Exactly. The culture mocks them to ensure that young men don't join them. It severs the intergenerational transfer of patriarchal wisdom. The older men can no longer teach the younger men how to be men.
But let me ask you this, acting on behalf of the listener trying to apply this. If traditional lodges are dying out and the Boy Scouts are fundamentally altered, where does Riker say men are supposed to actually find this necessary brotherhood today? Because we can't all go join an ancient Roman collegia.
He points to the physical realm. He says that while the political and academic spaces have been captured, physical reality cannot be altered by ideology. He says the palestra of antiquity, the ancient Greek wrestling schools where philosophers and warriors trained side by side, have been reborn.
Oh, modern gym.
Exactly. He draws a direct, unapologetic historical line from those ancient gymnasiums straight to modern commercial gyms, CrossFit boxes, and mixed martial arts academies. These, he argues, are the last standing sanctuaries of true male physical development and hierarchical learning.
And he has this great, incredibly vivid anecdote to illustrate exactly why these physical spaces matter so much in a world of ideological theory. He describes a scenario with a theoretical, highly educated academic. This is a guy who is thoroughly ideologically possessed by feminist theory and intersectionality.
The ultimate NPC in his view.
Exactly. This academic steps onto a Brazilian jiu-jitsu mat, and he starts arguing that martial arts technique is just a social construct designed by the patriarchy to elevate certain body types over others. So the instructor matches this big, loud academic with a much smaller 145-pound blue belt.
And we know exactly what happens next. When the academic tries to assert his egalitarian theories through brute force, the smaller man uses superior leverage, sweeps his balance, takes his back, and applies a flawless rear naked choke. In 10 seconds, the academic's vision starts to go black, and he is forced to physically tap out.
Riker's underlying point is profound. On the mat, your feelings do not matter. Your grievances do not matter. Your gender studies degree will not save you from a properly executed armbar or chokehold. The hierarchy established in that gym is real, it is brutal, and it is completely undeniably fair.
It's pure physics.
Exactly. It shatters the subjective illusions of modernity with the objective, unbreakable laws of physics.
And Riker connects this visceral hunger for hierarchical truth, this desire for objective physical reality, to the massive cultural resonance of modern figures like Jocko Willink. Jocko's podcast has billions of downloads. Why? Because, according to Riker, he provides the pragmatic, harsh reality of male physical discipline that a feminized, overly coddled society has violently stripped away.
He speaks the language of objective truth.
Exactly. He tells men to wake up early, lift heavy things, and take extreme ownership.
Okay, so we've covered the vast scope of this book. We've covered the history of the patriarchal inheritance, the institutional capture by Gramscian Marxists, the legal traps of the family court, the media demoralization matrix, and the critical need for physical, male-only spaces.
It's a lot.
It is. This brings us to the final, most actionable part of Riker's argument. With the external world seemingly completely rigged against them, Riker's ultimate call to action focuses entirely on what a man can actually control: his own mind and the four walls of his own household.
This is where we get into Stoic fortification building the inner citadel against psychological warfare. Riker tells his readers, you cannot control the decay of society. You cannot vote the gynocentric matrix out of existence. But you can build an impenetrable fortress in your own mind. And to do this, he relies heavily on ancient Stoic philosophy, specifically the teachings of Epictetus.
Let's break down Epictetus' three fields of study, because Riker uses them as a literal training manual. They are desire, action, and assent. How does Riker apply these to the modern man?
Desire is about mastering what you want. Riker demands that men completely sever their emotional dependency on leftist validation. You have to stop desiring the approval of a society that hates you. You have to stop caring if they call you toxic.
That's a huge shift for a lot of guys.
Huge. Then action is about doing your duty regardless of the outcome. And assent is about controlling your reactions to external events. To master this, he challenges his readers to a strict 30-day evening meditation routine. Every single night, you sit in silence and review your day.
Just silence.
Just silence. You ask yourself, where did I react with objective logic? Where did I fall victim to emotional reactivity and get drawn into petty arguments? He says if you do this relentlessly for 30 days, you will physically rewire your neural pathways to reject the pathological guilt of modernity. You transition from an NPC into a sovereign entity.
And once the mind is fortified, once you are a sovereign entity, Riker establishes the performance standard for the modern patriarch. And it's important to note, it's not about being a tyrant who yells at his family. He explicitly says the patriarch is a steward. He introduces the 3 P's of patriarchy: providing, protecting, and procreating.
He insists that manhood is not a fluid social construct that you can just opt in and out of. It is an elite standard, requiring daily sacrifice, physical risk, and immense responsibility.
So what does this all mean for the guy listening who has kids right now? What are the concrete, actionable blueprints Riker provides for fathers to execute this standard?
Riker issues very strict, uncompromising commands. First, he demands men spend an absolute minimum of 10 hours a week actively coaching their kids.
10 hours a week, minimum.
Minimum. You are not a spectator in your family. You are the primary architect of your children's worldview. If you aren't shaping them, the captured institutions will. And to help with this, he provides a very specific reading list designed to build a robust moral imagination, completely bypassing the progressive curriculum.
I found the reading list fascinating because it's so incredibly traditional. For ages 8 to 10, he says to read them. The Hardy Boys to teach logic and mystery solving, and Jack London's Call of the Wild to teach the brutal reality of nature.
That's classic stuff.
Yeah. For ages 11 to 13, it's Tolkien's Lord of the Rings for the epic struggle of good versus evil, and Homer's Odyssey for the hero's journey home. And for ages 14 to 18, it's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations for Stoic discipline and Teddy Roosevelt's The Strenuous Life.
The goal is to feed them a steady psychological diet of competent men facing insurmountable odds and conquering them through sheer will and logic.
But he also demands physical execution. Reading isn't enough. He shares the incredible story of a 44-year-old Montana father who realized his sons were getting soft. So he took his 3 teenage sons on a grueling 5-day wilderness backpacking trip. And he stripped away all modern safety nets, no GPS allowed.
Wow, just old school maps.
Dead reckoning navigation, using only a map and compass. They hiked through freezing rain. They had to catch and forage their own food.
It was a manufactured crucible. And Riker notes that while the boys suffered in the moment, they later declared it the absolute highlight of their entire year. Riker uses this to prove a fundamental point. He says, male joy is intrinsically tied to mastered hardship. The boy does not want an iPad, he wants a dragon to slay.
And he ends the book with a command for immediate action. He tells the reader, do not just put this book on the shelf and feel good about yourself. You must take physical action within 7 days of finishing the text. Draft a stringent household budget. Organize a formal family meeting to establish core values. Set up a command center in your garage for physical training. As Riker says, reading without physical execution is completely sterile.
It's a total, unapologetic reclamation of masculine authority. Stand up, build your citadel, and lead your family, or be consumed by the mob.
It is a relentless, sweeping, incredibly dense argument from page 1 to the end.
It really is. Which brings us to the close of our deep dive today. But before we sign off, we always like to leave you, the listener, with something provocative to chew on, something that maybe pushes back against the text just a bit.
This raises an important question, something for you to mull over on your own. Throughout the book, Riker relies heavily on the legacy of Enlightenment thinkers, men like Locke, Kant, and Newton. These were men who championed universal reason, objective truth, and empirical reality above all else. Yet look at the modern digital landscape, the very arena where much of this culture war is actually fought, and ironically, where Riker himself publishes and promotes his work. That digital landscape is inherently designed by algorithms to fracture universal truth into highly personalized, emotionally reactive echo chambers. The internet runs on outrage and emotional engagement, not syllogistic logic.
That's a great point.
So the provocative question is this: can a genuine return to ancient stoicism and physical, hyper-rational, male-only spaces truly survive in a digitized world that literally monetizes our emotional reactivity? Or is the ultimate red pill entirely unplugging from the digital matrix, the very same matrix that Riker relies on to spread his message in the first place?
It's an incredible contradiction. Is the internet itself the ultimate Kafka trap? You engage to fight the culture war, but the engagement itself makes you emotional and reactive, destroying your stoicism. It's a fascinating paradox to wrestle with.
It really is.
You know, we started this deep dive by talking about the diagnostic X-ray, that deep human desire for a clean, binary understanding of a broken system. Conrad Riker clearly believes with absolute conviction that he holds that X-ray in his hands and he sees the jagged line of cultural decay with absolute certainty. Whether you agree with his stark diagnosis or fundamentally reject his entire premise, you cannot deny the meticulous, historically layered, and unapologetic way he presents his case.
Absolutely.
I want to sincerely thank you for taking this extensive deep dive into a highly controversial, incredibly complex cultural text with us today. It takes serious intellectual stamina to engage with ideas this provocative for an hour. Please take a second to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these deep dives into the books shaping our culture. And finally, if you are part of the target audience we mentioned at the top and you want to explore Riker's intellectual war further, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Guilty Until Proven Male, and be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at his Substack. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the narratives, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.